What's up, Rat Pack? A lot of these conversations require some bit of intro for me to let you know who it is that we're talking to, just kind of give some context for the conversation. This may be the one that requires neither of those. Uh, but it's a conversation that I've been waiting quite some time to have. Not only because I get the opportunity to discuss my personal experience of making The Last of Us Part 2 and also playing The Last of Us Part 2, but I finally get to hear the inner thoughts and feelings of a dear friend and an amazing, fierce, collaborative partner. So, this is my conversation with Neil Druckmann. Let's get into it.
By the way, can you hear me okay? Is everything?
God damn, you sound just fucking gorgeous. Yeah. Yeah. What have you been doing this week? What are you doing?
Working, man. I can't fucking catch a break.
Why? What do you mean?
Just there's the HBO show, there's other projects, there's just company stuff.
Has your, I mean, before...
Are we recording, by the way? We started? We can start.
Yeah, we can edit whatever you want out, but I won't. This is the first time that you ever shipped a game as like management, not labor. You know what I mean? Like you've shipped how many games? 6 games?
I mean, let's see. Jack 3, Jack X, highlight of my career. Uncharted 1, Uncharted 2, Last of Us, Left Behind, Uncharted 4, Last of Us 2.
So you've shipped 8 games.
I mean, I have a credit on Lost Legacy, but I don't account that.
Why? Because...
I mean, I was only involved early on, so just to kind of set the structure of that story, but...
What the fuck? What was it different for you shipping a game as because your title is vice president, is that right? Or co-president? What is your title?
So many titles. How dare you?
It's ironic.
Let's go through all the titles.
You were
vice president, director, co-writer
of The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah, I mean, vice president is more like a company title,
right?
Because I'm not vice president on Last of Us Part 2. That's a little
kind of. I mean,
yeah, I guess so. But
was it different though, shipping a game as a vice president, or is it just kind of like business as usual? You still like I still cry and I still get like a tub of ice cream, just like. You're that typical guy that like you get the post-production blues and you miss the baby that you just put in the basket and sent down the river?
So many Jewish references.
The most reference I just made.
I guess to answer the first question is what was different is the past. Let's see, Last of Us, Left Behind, Uncharted 4. Bruce Straley was my co-director, like partner and all that. And this is the first title I shipped without him. And I think more than anything, I felt that
What'd you feel?
It was a different dynamic as far as just the structure of the team and who I worked with. As far as the vice president stuff, I'm involved in more company stuff, but I have been for a while, even before I had the title, and the title just made it more official. I think just as you get to kind of director level, you get involved more and more with company stuff.
Do you prefer to be, or some people are solo artists and some people, I need a band, or do you find yourself to be more of a person who prefers to have a band, or are you a solo artist in the absence of that dynamic that you had on Last of Us? I mean, and not just that, but also several other games before that. Did you prefer to kind of be by yourself, or do you prefer to have those? I think I know the answer to this question, but it's fun to ask anyway.
It's definitely been an evolution, but I prefer to be in the band. The way you've put it is just to see people take ideas further than what you could do on your own, and just be impressed and blown away by that. that's fun. That's sometimes the best part of the job.
Were you always blown away? I mean, I'm not saying are you always blown away, but were you always blown away? Like, have you grown into the place where it's like, oh, now I know the joy of being able to have my ideas be taken by somebody else, interpreted through their worldview or their skill set and
You
made
know
better.
that's because I think when I started and I wasn't in control, I wanted that control. I wanted like more creative control, and it was. It's not that it was hard to buy in someone else's vision, but I always like kind of bumped up against my ideas and kind of high. Like I work well on like just high level stuff, and I think that's what I gravitate towards. So then I think finally when I had that, that's when it became easier to just let go of that control and
Mm,
trust people more and more. And I trust people way more now than I did on Last of Us One.
mm.
Um, Part of it is necessity because I don't have the time that I did on Last of Us One to like let's say write. So like now writing is the thing, one of the things I love the most to do in my job, and I couldn't do it as much. At least not the kind of like getting down into like final draft and writing a script and getting and doing first drafts of dialogues and all that. Like on Last of Us One, I did almost all of that. Here, I did less than half.
Your job, because I mean, when we sat down, what was that? It was like December of, it's at the end of the year for sure. When you sat me down and actually we walked through like the whole, here's the beats. Um, and what was interesting was hearing you talk about that with Ashley and that you actually had the idea earlier, but you kind of let it gestate to where you're like, okay, this is it. And what I find fascinating, I mean, I'm going to be all over the place. I'm playing through the game, and in my
By the way, we're talking about Last of Us Part Two, right? Not
we're
Jack
talking,
X.
we're talking. Well, no, we're actually talking about Jack X. I don't care about Last of Us Part Two. The thing that I found interesting as I'm playing through, one of the things is instead of the temptation for me is always, and you kind of helped me get away from this, but the temptation for me was always like, all right, I remember shooting this scene and how different from, what I had in my mind was it than what we actually ended up putting in game. And my companion guide to that, my journal that I had was the beat sheet that you gave me in your office at your house. And we were sitting on the couch and just kind of going through everything. And I kept thinking, I was like, oh, that must have gotten cut. Oh man, that must have gotten cut because clearly I'm at the end. No, I had. There were about four different people that told me. I was like, I think I'm close to the finish. They're like, where are you at? I was like, here. Like, no, man, you're laughably far. And even at the very, very end, the moment where Ellie and Abby, or Ellie finds Abby, I was like, son of a bitch. That was in, like, I don't remember it, at least from my recollection. There's not a lot of stuff that got scrapped, if anything. I can't think of, at least the beats that you told me. I
I'm
think maybe
pretty
some of the
sure that the
game.
version I pitched you had the boar hunting sequence when Ellie's in the farm. You remember that? Because that
No.
was there almost all the way to the end. In fact, it was playable. We had like a whole. So in farm, one of the things we had was Ellie hunting. We wanted to show several days of her living on this farm with Dina, and she was hunting a boar. And the
Oh.
idea was that she couldn't let go of the killing. Like she needed to like kill this animal, and that was just part of her dealing with her PTSD. And it was kind of interesting to get into her psyche. And as she kills the boar, and it's kind of squeals, and she hears Joel. Like it's kind of like it was mixed with like your scream. And it just for pacing and production, we ended up cutting that. But that was part of the pitch for, I believe, when around the time you heard it.
I remember that now, and I think one reason why that didn't like ping my memory weird was because I found that moment evolved in the barn with the sheep.
Mm.
To me, I don't know. This is my interpretation of it. That is a way. I like that analog better of lamb to slaughter. The to Ellie, the innocence of that, and I don't know for some reason that tracks better with me. By the way, that's one of my favorite parts of the entire game. Is on the farm. The the character building, Jeffrey Pierce, man, just that's his best scene. He
I love that
Slave.
scene. That scene gets a lot of criticism. I don't know if you've seen that, but there's a lot of
Oh,
people that like, why is in the theater? Tommy's like he's ready to let Abby go, and then the next time we see him, he's upset at Ellie for not going after Abby, and that's one of those things where
huh.
a year passes, right? It's like, and he's off screen for a year, right? The baby has been born. It's several months out. Like the baby is like not even a baby anymore. It's just
Toddler.
becoming a toddler. And there's a year you didn't get to see Tommy of like, okay, the guy's like essentially couldn't save Joel, couldn't save Jesse, now has a limp, is blind in one eye, has
Lost
lost
a
his
wife.
relationship fell apart. And it's like, of course he's going to be different. He's a vastly different person, but it's like, we don't spoon feed you all that stuff. And I think for some people it doesn't land because they're not seeing that trajectory of his character.
I don't think
That's kind of fascinating to me.
I can't think of a single thing in this game that was spoon fed to me. As an audience member, as a player, I don't think that there was anything. There was so many moments. Like one of my favorite moments of part one was the whole walking up the stairs when you get into Billstown and the after truck ambush, and you're like, I've been on both sides. That to me is such a tossed away and truly profound moment because it's one of the biggest character revelations, and the way that it happens systemically, it's just it's beautiful. But the part two is just chock full of those things. That moments like you had with Ish, the whole saga of Ish, and going through those are rampant throughout part two. So I don't feel that there was anything that was really spoon fed to me. But I feel like I could take someone who didn't play part one and even didn't play part two, sit them down on the farm, and just from the time that we start, have them go through that. And it's probably like a 28, 30 minute whole scene or sequence between gameplay and everything. They could fully understand the world, the characters, what's at stake, and everything. And that to me is like a pretty good calling card, whether it be a TV show, especially because that's done episodically, not a movie. You can't just take one scene out of a movie and get full context. Hopefully, it's a shitty movie. But to be able to do that for a game to me was like, I know everything and I instantly want to play that. Like, but I don't remember. I remember the farm happening like, it felt like way sooner. But then now I think about it, that was at the very end. But I guess I felt like we were going to play longer towards the end after that moment. And we, and
In
we,
the again, I believe the pitch you heard as well. Let me see if I remember. It had Ellie going. It might have already been Santa Barbara when you heard it. Initially, that was Mexico, and then later we changed to Santa Barbara. And she was gonna essentially find this slaver camp,
yeah,
and then find Abby, and then in rescuing Abby, Abby like at that point I think neither Yara or Lev survived, and then Abby beelines it to like this manor, this mansion where like the guy that
mansion.
ran this whole facility was there, and she gets revenge on him. And again, it was speaking kind of that cycle of violence, but it in hindsight now, I'm glad we changed it because Abby she's already done all that. She's like, her arc is not about revenge anymore. It's about redemption. And that's where like, that's something we discovered as we're making the game and discovering Lev and Lev's relationship with Abby and how that mirrors Joel and Ellie's relationship. And it's like, it became all about that. But that's actually something we didn't know ahead of time. We discovered it while making it, which is one of the wonderful things about how we work. It's like we keep excavating the material as we go through it. And when
That's
the first game, and I get this criticism, and actually I agree with this. The first game is cleaner, it's simpler,
mm,
and because of that, I think it's easier to just buy into Joel's journey, and he really only deviates at the very end to reveal his kind of darker side. Maybe like around winter when he tortures those guys, but really what he does at the hospital. Here, from almost from the get go, the character you're playing is making morally dubious choices, and if we don't let up, it's like the whole kind of like once like Ellie's in Seattle, it just gets worse and worse and worse, and then you're kind of doing similar stuff with Abby as well.
even the way that the game responded to me. There's that moment where I'm trying to remember the first time that it happens. We're with Dina, and I guess it's when we were going through, and it's the WLF that we find, and you have the option to just you don't have that. You can't give them mercy. It's not like a last stand or something. But you do your first finishing move. Basically, they're on their knees. And Dina comments, she's like, Jesus, Ellie. Like that there's that. And it was the first time that I've ever seen a narrative being so infused with the mechanics so that I realized that I had leveled up without there being any power up or anything else. It was just like, you now have the ability to do this. And not only have the ability, but this is what you will be doing from here on out. There has been a shift in the character, and therefore the way that you play will invariably be different. Was that planned, or was that just kind of my interpretation of it?
No, that's Ellie's. So the way our systemic dialogue works is we'll come up with um, heuristics, like a if-then statement, like if all these variables are correct, if you've killed someone in this manner, and you're at this part of the game, and Dina is your ally standing next to you, then trigger a line from this bucket. And those buckets will shift and change according to Ellie's arc. So by the end of the game, when she's killing people, she's colder and more ruthless than she is at the beginning of the game. And it's a really subtle systemic thing that hopefully you're not too conscious of, but it's there to just support the kind of higher level narrative that's going on. And we did similar stuff in the first game with how Ellie reacts to Joel. Like in the beginning of the game, she has much bigger reactions to his brutality, and those kind of die down as you get further in the game, and she gets more desensitized and used to what he's doing.
Is that one of the high level things that you talked about? Or is that something that you learn that while doing the first one? Did you know that? Did you see that games could do that and you wanted to make sure that was part of your game? Or where did the idea that come along? Or does that team? Like where does that happen?
That's definitely team. That wasn't part of the initial pitch. And like as we're building the game and we're talking about so much of our conversation about character arcs. How do the characters shift and change? And then how to reflect that in the story and how to reflect that through mechanics, even level design, lighting, like everything is kind of there to reflect where we want you to connect. Or, more so in Last of Us Part 2 is like even disconnect from the characters that you're playing as, and just to evoke certain feelings for the player.
It's easy to go down the path of marketing beats, and there's not a question I could ask you about the game that you probably haven't at least been asked or definitely have anticipated and answered eloquently. But you taught me a lot about I think one of the biggest influences that you had as far as how I think or communicate is how much I pause now before I answer. Like I didn't do that before. I was always, and I prided myself. Huge left turn, but fuck it. I always prided myself on being able to give the perfect answer right on the spot, or seemingly at least. It was probably bullshit, or ramp up into a real answer by giving myself runway with bullshit fluff. And I seeing how you work, and especially like if I would ask you a question, I'd always get the same thing where and I tell people all the time, is like, you do the thing where you rock on the outside of your shoes and you go, and a lot of times you will reiterate the question, do I think I should change the line? No. Something like that. But there's this, I have never, I had never been, I guess maybe exposed to such a genuine way to actually consider someone else's perspective on something. And I don't know if, again, that just kind of like you did that because out of necessity, or because you saw someone do that and you were like, when I get the chance to do this, because and if hopefully we can get into this, but you did not start off as the director of The Last of Us Part One, right? So like
That is
even
correct. I did not
yeah.
start out as the creative director as The Last of Us Part 2.
Um, but the perception of it was that you were the person to ask when it came to, especially on stage. Like there was all sorts of things that were happening back at the studio that that were definitely there were committees and there were people that were critical to every movement that was happening. But I always came to you on stage. That's why it was so interesting about titles, because that was something that I think was important to you at one point, and then as you go along, you discover you don't want to be the solo artist, that you do want to be the guy in the band. But I'm deviating a little bit. The One of the things that I was, and then we could go beat by beat with the game and talk about the aha moments. And I was texting you as I was playing along. I was like, I would just have to give you one line, like, I'm here. And you're like, go, shut up and keep playing. There is in the aftermath of all of this, we have seen how once you create art and you put it out there, and the world goes, here's what we think about it, regardless of what your intention was or anything else. And I know you well enough to know that you don't necessarily think about, you refuse to allow yourself to go down that path of what will people think about this, because you're very purposeful about the moments that you're creating when you are creating them. But while you're creating them, there's these moments of contention. There's these moments of, like you said, you kind of bump up against your own ideas. And a lot of times you do that with the people that you partner with. You and I have had those moments. How did you learn how to, because I feel there's a lot of times when you kind of took my energy and were able to redirect me and helped allow me to see a different perspective of that. Where did that come from? Like, how do you do that? Because it fundamentally changed the way that I approach people, and it definitely it changed the way that I approached this project and specifically this character. So like, I want to get into that a little bit. How do you get that skill? Like, where did that come from?
Um, it's hard to pinpoint because I didn't used to be like that. And it's definitely a muscle that you keep working at of how to listen. And I remember when I got my master's at Carnegie Mellon, there's a program called Entertainment Technology. The Entertainment Technology Center, the degree is Master in Entertainment Technology. It sounds
You
more
can flex.
pretentious than it is. But one of the first classes you take there, and it's maybe the hardest I've ever worked in my life, is a course called Building Virtual Worlds, where you are teamed up, the class is people of all sorts of different disciplines. You might be a modeler, a programmer, a producer, and then you get put in a group of like 4 or 5 people of different disciplines. And there'll be a theme for that, those usually 2 to 3 weeks of like, what's something that we had, indirect control might be the theme. Like get someone to do something without explicitly telling them what to do. And you have to come with a concept and you have to execute a virtual reality experience in those 2 to 3 weeks, and then play test it. And then sometimes we get it in front of the class and have someone that has never played it, play it live. And then you might fall flat on your face. And then get people in the class to critique it. So one, like you work on getting thick skin because you might have something that doesn't work at all, and you're going to hear about it from the professor, from your fellow students. And the other thing that was really smart in that, because that course, like it sounds like that course is about virtual reality or gameplay or all that. And while you do learn those things, that course is not about that. That course was about collaboration. And at the end of each one of those cycles, you would get a sheet for each team member, and you make it anonymous, and you write 3 good qualities that person had and 3 qualities they need to work on. And you do that throughout the whole semester, and we went to like 5 or 6 cycles, I forget how many. And at the end of the semester, you get an envelope this thick of like all these like, and then you look at them and you see when everybody says the same negative thing about you, you're like, oh shit, this is something I got to work on. And like, so things I would get like, hard worker was like almost always there, like creative ideas, and then control freak, kind of a dick to work, they didn't use those words, but like not pleasant to be around. And that kind of really stuck with me of like, oh man, I'm not a team player. That that's always kind of in the back of my mind, is like that semester. And then starting at Naughty Dog, I don't know, a few months later as an intern, and then slowly coming up the ranks, like there's a few people I kind of looked up to that became mentors. And one is Bruce Straley, that later became kind of my directing partner. But I loved seeing how he worked, and he was always open to ideas. So whenever someone pitched something, he would do that thing you described, which is like pause, consider it, play it in his head, and then respond. It wasn't this like gut reaction. And then the other one is my current boss, Evan Wells, the president of Naughty Dog, is very similar to that, which is when I come to him with ideas or issues with the studio or whatever we're talking about, everything is considered. Everything is like, it's always coming from an open mind of like, I'm the dumbest person in the room. Let me try to think that through. Let me think through what you're saying, and then kind of open my mouth and respond. And I really admired that about them, and kind of try to take that on. Another one was Gordon Hunt, who was the director, the motion capture director on Uncharted 1, 2, 3, and seeing how he worked with actors. And he directed some of the early shoots for Last of Us as well. And there was a lot to learn there from just his calm demeanor on the set. Again, everybody is considered. When everybody has a question, it's like there's no rush. Like everyone else can pause. I'm talking to this person right now, and I'm going to give them my full attention, and doing my best to learn from that and replicate that as much as I could has been kind of, again, an ongoing process.
Could you feel the change between just even part one, part two? It's when we wrapped on part one was probably the last shoot. Had to have been.
I mean, even part one, from the beginning of part one to the end of part one, I felt there was a change because I was so insecure about the craft of directing and what that meant. And every day you're thinking about, am I looking foolish in front of all these professionals? Am I making the wrong call? Is this story too subtle or too on the nose, or kind of shitty, or too right? Because you don't know. Like you're like, I'm excited by it, but maybe I have really bad taste. I'm not sure.
There's three specific moments that are my favorite stories to tell when people ask, like, what is it like to work with you? One of them, of course, is the first time that we shot. Well, no, actually, the first one would be the whole Video Village conversation, which I think was the first kind of reprimand that I ever
I didn't
got.
see it as a reprimand, but go ahead.
Not at all. It wasn't a reprimand. It was the first time I really saw you stepping up to be the director, as opposed to just like, yeah, here's some ideas for of your performance for the scene. But it was this thing where like came in, and you approached it in such a great way. You're like, I need your help, man. Like, I recognize this thing that you do. You ask me, why do I do that?
Mm.
And I think I leave that out a lot of times because I've rehearsed the story so many times now. I know exactly when to tell the joke. But the truth is that you asked me, why do you do that? And you were genuinely curious to know why. I was like, well, because I need to go back and I need to see. I'm a physical learner, and again, you did the thing where you considered. You're like, okay, so the reason why, and just if you haven't heard this story, you've never listened to an interview with me. But the story is thus. Actually, I'm curious. I've always told it. If you're, I'm happy to take the reins, but I would be curious to see what that story is like from your perspective.
Sure. So some of it came from insecurity of like needing to be the director on the set, for sure. But some of it was, I have to talk a little bit about the process of becoming a director. Was I read this book, I think it's called On Directing Actors by Judith Weston. And then I took her course. And that course really is about acting. And, you get in front of the class and you learn like acting techniques of how to put yourself in a material and how to approach a material from the inside instead of from the outside. Like really, as an actor, try to remove yourself as much as you can from what you look like, and more, how can I put myself more in the scene? How could I pay attention more to the actor in front of me and react to them? And I was trying to facilitate that kind of thinking as much as possible. And my concern was like, if you're going and looking at the cameras, if you're looking at the shot, then you're like, again, you can't help but put yourself on the outside. At least that's what I thought. I was like, I'm
Completely.
worried Troy's going to look at himself and be like, oh, I'm walking the wrong way. I should hit this stride, or I should hit this moment. Like, I don't want this I just want a different kind of thought process on the set. I wanted you to like pay attention to what Ashley's doing and nothing else. And let's get down to the emotions of it, and who fucking cares what it looks like on the camera. That was the thinking. And again, in time, I've learned to let that go. Like now, like I work with certain actors and I see them go and do the thing. And I'm like, they got to go do the thing. That's on them. Like they got to figure it out. I'm not going to, if they come to me and then ask like, oh, how do you want me to enter? Should I walk this way or this way? Like usually the answer will be like, I'm not sure. Let's see how would you walk. Like what I'm concerned about is like, get this from her, or like, I'll talk about objectives, or like, what are the character's wants and needs, instead of like, what do they look like?
I First of all, it was the right call. And I can't speak to anybody else's process or the way that they work. But for me, it didn't necessarily, from my perspective, it didn't expose your insecurity as much as it exposed mine. Because anyone who is afraid to be led is doing so out of fear. I was afraid to be led. I was afraid that to trust, and I was afraid of what I looked like, and so that's why I was obsessing about that. And I thought that that made me look like a diligent actor. I understand how everything works. They call this video village, and that's where I'm going behind. Let me get some playback, please. I had all the terms down, and essentially what I was doing was I was precluding you from your position and doing your job, because I would go back behind there and go, let me see playback, please. That's what a fucking director does, and an actor doesn't do that. So, and it helped because for me, I was consistently keeping myself in a cycle of being on the outside of the scene and not being inside the material, because Joel he's not aware that he's on a set and that there's cameras and that there's playback to be had. It's like, holy shit, I can redo that moment. That is 100. And there's a difference between living in the moment and keeping that outside. I don't believe in being walking around, and if you and I are enemies, then you and I are going to be enemies. Thought when we go to lunch too, and this is the way I'm going to talk to you. Just like, you know what, man, it's called acting, as Laurence Olivier said.
By the way, I
But
would love to work one day with an actor that does that. That just no matter what, just stays in character, even through lunch. Like we're like there, like picking our food, and they're just like in character the whole time.
yeah, you want to do that once, and then you realize that, like, it's this guy's and this guy. I worked with somebody one time that was like that, and even he got tired of it. And he was like, I was trying to do this, and man, I'm sorry. I was like, yeah, you're an asshole. And it's like a long shoot too, so we had to deal with this guy for like 3 months of being this way. But that's one moment. The other moment, of course, is the scene with Sarah, part one and part two. Um, and again, I'm enjoying kind of hearing from your perspective. I've told that story from my perspective countless times. The What was that like for you? Like, what was that's seemingly a moment of contention. But what was that like for you?
I don't remember if we've talked about this, at least in this kind of setting, but I had a certain idea for it in my mind, and I talked about like I think one of my mistakes I made was I built up that scene with you for too long. Like we kind of like, we would talk about it. We talk, oh my God, we're like a month away from shooting. Oh my God, it's 2 weeks away from shooting it. And it just, in doing so, I think I was creating this conception that should be like big and dramatic. And I think I even at some point talked about Godfather 3, which not a not the best Godfather, but when his
No.
daughter dies and Al Pacino screams, there's something so visceral to that scream. Spoiler alert for Godfather 3. There's something so visceral about that scream at the end, where like initially like you don't hear the audio, and then the audio comes in and it's just him just belting out this, like he lost everything. And the scene ended up looking more like that. And I'm not sure if at this point, if before or while shooting that scene, it felt wrong for the scene.
Hmm.
And I wanted it to be like as small and intimate as possible. And I felt like I couldn't come up with the right way to get us there. That's not entirely true, because I felt like we started at some point, and got to like a better place, or at least even better, like even better. Again, I'm putting so much judgment on it, which I don't think is right. But it's like the thing I was after. Uh, and again, my insecurity kicked in, which is like, I'm working with this really talented actor. I'm working with
And
Hannah
so,
Hayes, who's like given this like amazing, like she's just pouring every ounce of her soul into each one of these takes.
yeah.
Jeffrey's there, and right, he's on the side, but he's going through a whole emotional thing. And at some point, I'm feeling the pressure of like, in every take, it's like this like the pressure cooker is like just fucking end it. Like I'm feeling people like don't want to do this again and again and again. So I've convinced myself, I don't forget after how many takes, like we got it. I'm like, I don't have a single take where I have the whole thing, but I feel like we have the pieces. And then we come back to the studio and we start editing it. And, you know, we grab a piece from here and a piece from there and we start putting it together. And like, we get to the best version of that. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, it's good. It's good.
It's
No, but I'm like, it could be
okay.
better. It could be better. I'm like, it could be better. And it's like, this scene is so important because it just, it puts everything, it sets everything in motion. It sets the tone of the story. And that's one of those things where I hated the feeling that I was wrong. I hated the feeling that I was on the set and I should have kept going. I didn't want to admit that. So I like, for several days, I'm like, this is it. We're not changing it. This is it. But as I'm talking it through, and like, I think it was Sean Sky and Ryan James and our editor, Sean was our lead cinematic animator. Just realizing like we talk about versions where it could be better for this story, and it's eating away at me. And I'm sure at some point I talked to Bruce and I talked to Evan, and the thing that was great with both of them, and just with the privilege that we have at Naughty Dog, they're like, then reshoot it.
Hmm.
We have the time and money, reshoot it. If you feel like it could be better, this is important. So then it became about my ego of like going to all the different people, to you, and to say, I fucked up. We got to go back to that scene. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Uh, and you know, like, and I totally understand your reaction, which was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I gave everything on that scene. And I know like the personal thing you drew from to get to that place. And like, and I'm asking like, you got to do it again. Um, and then the fear is I'm going to lose the trust. These people are so
Hmm.
much of like, right, director, people on the team, it's got to be trust. Because if they start questioning your choices and what's left, right? Because that's really your director is like about, here are different choices. We're going to go this way instead of this way. And then to say, fuck it, I'm going to face those fears. Let's do it again. Let's see if we could make it better. And we did, and it worked out. So I'm glad that it did.
It's a better scene because of it. I've said this so many times as well. The I only remember saying one thing the first time to you, which I think was like take 4 or 5. I just remember like it was 4 words. It's like this is really hard. I remember saying that to you, and I was like still crying. I was like, oh shit, because it was revealing about my abilities, and I remember having the thought of going like, man, Meryl Streep really is that good. Like she really is worthy of being. Now I get it. It's like, holy shit, she's really able to just kind of tap into this. And it's not so much about, and this is something that I learned from you as well. The crying is not that's not the trick. That's not the jazz. The real sauce of it is the knowing that you need to cry or going to cry and not showing and holding it back. It's not giving the audience what they need, which could set up the rest of this conversation with what
Well,
they feel.
this is a perfect example of the stuff that I learned from Judith Weston. Is like when you do a crying scene, one of the last things I think you want to go and tell the actors, like, I need you to cry right here, um, because, and again, there's certain actors. Laura Bailey is an example of one of those actors where she wants that kind of direction, and she's like, let me interpret that
Right.
into motivation and thought process. So with Laura Bailey, it's like I do like everything I've learned. I have to do the opposite of like the kind of cheap tricks of like, so with Laura, I'm like, I'm sorry, bad direction, but I need you to be angrier here. Whatever that means to you, you'll figure it out. With no, I don't do that with anybody else, just with Laura, because that's what she wants.
Yeah.
Um, so the point is, like, you don't say that because for a lot of people, it just puts them outside of themselves. Like, oh, I need to look a certain way,
Mm,
instead of just saying, what is it that you want? Or what are you trying to fix here? Let's talk about that. Like, and for the Sarah scene, it was specifically, it was like, it became, I want it to be less about grieving and more about fix it. Like, I
hmm.
want to see Joel trying to fix it and he can't. And the realization that he can't fix it. That became more interesting than the kind of the crying. The crying came on top of it, and that what gave it, like, it brought everything together. But I think we had to earn that. We had to get there.
I remember specifically saying when we shot the second time, he's like, "What I have now is a man broken." I was like, "Yeah, his daughter just died." He's like, "What I don't have is what's happening. This is happening. I can fix it. It's not working. She's going. She's gone. I'm broken." I was like, it was all of those micro steps that I'd not thought about. I just remember it was like, remember that people will think you're a good actor if you cry. And I was so concerned with making sure that people knew that I was a good actor. And you were the one that draw. He's like, you haven't even looked at her. Like, not there, not in any of these takes have you looked at her. You looking everywhere but. And the credit goes to not only to you pointing that out, but also to Hannah for just being a vortex to that just sucked you in. It's like once you look at her, you're like, that's all I want to do is just take care of her. Coming up to the surface very briefly, because one of my favorite moments of shooting on, or my favorite bits of direction that I ever got from you ever, you had walked around the set and you had said something to Richard, and you'd walked over and said something to Nolan, and you're walking over me, and you're kind of because you still take analog notes. So there's a piece of pen, or there's a piece of paper and a pen, and whatever chicken scratch handwriting you have because it's illegible to
Half
anybody
the time,
else.
I can't even read it. I'm like,
Like,
why did I
what did
write
I
this?
write
What does
this?
this mean?
What is it? Someone's gonna have to interpret this because I don't even know what this means. Um, but you walked over to me and you go, "Do less," and walked away. You're like, that's all the direction that I need, and you're absolutely right. Um, but cut to you talk about trust and that you have to earn that trust. I tell people there's only been two times that I can think of where you and I have argued. And one of them were about both times were about pivotal scenes in the game. One being in part one and one being in part two. And I remember exactly where I was. And here we approach this scene that again we knew was going to happen. So we're kind of finding ourselves going around the same merry-go-round. It's like, gotta get here. We know it's gonna get here. And I'm walking in now. Both of us, I think, are walking in with all sorts of like I have like matching Louis Vuitton luggage for my baggage of all the shit that I'm walking into that scene with, and just the project in general, right? It's the oh shit, now it's real. It was a great idea, but now we actually got to do it, and you're gonna make me do it. Okay, but we're gonna go out my way, and I've got this whole Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid version of the way that Joel's gonna go out, and somehow like there's a horse involved, and there's clearly a sunset that he's
I would
gonna
have
run
made
to.
many players very happy that version of it.
The truly heroic ending. No, I never knew. I never felt it was going to be that, nor did it need to be that. And there's something that you said in an interview the other day, and it was like this world does not deal in those commodities of what he deserved. It doesn't deal in commodities of heroes or villains. This is not a punishment, nor is this a reward. It's just this is the way the world works, and that is such a better version than the version that I could have ever conceivably come up with. But it didn't stop me from trying. It didn't stop me from arguing with you about it. And I remember getting the pages and knowing in my gut, knowing that everything that was on the page, everything that I was reading was right. Knowing that we have
Well,
years.
but
Well,
to give you credit,
okay.
you had one piece of feedback that changed the scene not only changed that scene, but changed the story around that scene. Do you remember?
No.
It was when we had Joel's head bashed in, and we're saying like his brain is like the neurons are barely firing, and Ellie's lying down, and he says Sarah. and you
Yeah.
fought that, right? Like you just had such a visceral reaction to that. And our compromise was like, let's shoot both versions. Let's shoot the version where he doesn't say it and the version where he does say it. And you were right, right? The version where he doesn't say it was stronger for that scene. And I think because of that, we removed other references and talking about Sarah. Like, right, there's a scene where like Tommy comes to Ellie after Joel's death, and he's talking to her about Joel wouldn't do this because Ellie says like Joel will be halfway to Seattle by now, and Tommy's point was like there was no point that Joel thought to go after the captain that ordered Sarah's death. That just he didn't think about that. Like that's not how he treated violence. And
Hmm.
again, we had that in there to like kind of remind you of Sarah and what happened with Sarah. And it's like once we removed all that, the story got cleaner. And there's still right, there's still the picture of Sarah. Like Sarah's presence is still in that story, but it didn't need to be that on the nose about it.
I never, first of all, that was one of the many moments of anticipation because I purposefully insulated myself. Because I had so much joy playing Left Behind, I had a completely different kind of joy playing The Last of Us the first time. But playing Left Behind, I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. I didn't do anything on this. And so I got to experience this as close to what it's like to be just a normal gamer experiencing this story. And because my involvement as an actor was far more limited this time, which I wrestled with at first. And I remember Becky even saying something about that. It was like, well, your role is going to be much smaller. I was like, ow, you know. She was thinking about it from a product management or project management standpoint, as opposed to it's like, yeah, but I mean, Joel is still going to be. And it's like Joel is pervasive throughout the entire game. He's constantly there. Um,
By the way, let me. So can I just pause you real quick because it's
yeah,
something really interesting I'm watching now, like looking at reading praise and criticism, and just how opposite of the spectrum all the feedback can be, which is
uh,
how you can't please everybody. So it's like you'll see a lot of people complain Joel is not enough in the game, and then
right.
other people complain his presence is too much in the game. It doesn't give Ellie room to breathe, and it's fascinating. Like I love that stuff.
That to me is the biggest, the best thing about this game. First of all, it is to everybody at the studio and everybody whose fingers smudged all over this game. Truly, just as a narrative and mechanical, systemic, cinematic, interactive experience, it's truly second to none. Like I had one of my favorite Naughty Dog set pieces is when you're in the truck with Jesse, and it makes the truck ambush scene. It's like, oh, that was like a long time ago. We've learned a lot since then, and I literally was laughing. I was like, had that giddy laugh of just like, ha 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 ha, ha, that is normally reserved for an Uncharted game because it was just mayhem that was happening, and it's just clickers coming after, you, and you're shooting, you're driving. I was like, this is everything that I love about a Naughty Dog game mixed with all of these like incredibly powerful. Most people that I know that played this and people like just barrel through games played this in like 2 to 3 hour chunks, and they're like, that's all. Like Jeffrey played this in 2 to 3 hour chunks. Jacksepticeye played this in like he's like, man, I can't. I just need to take a break. I don't want to. First of all, I don't want it to be over, and then you realize you're like, oh, I have like 28 more hours to go. But the I just got wrapped up all in the game. The what were we talking about? We were talking about something really cool. Oh, we're talking about Joel. One of the best things about this is a game is that it transcends just being a game and it becomes a platform for discourse. And we noticed that with the first game, there's people that have given like their thesis and their dissertation for their thesis
By the way,
on
how
this.
wild is that? How crazy is that?
It's
I
not though.
mentioned it. So I mentioned this in another interview, but how crazy is it? Like I didn't really have a lot time to reflect on this, but now I more so than during production. It was like there are more than a handful of people now at Naughty Dog that's worked hard to get into gaming because
because
of
of
The
Last
Last
of
of Us.
Yeah.
How like fucking awesome is that?
It's right on par with, hey, I saw Godfather, or I saw um whoever, like big directors from the 70s or even 80s and 90s or whatever. Now it's like Christopher Nolan. I saw, following is like that made me want to become a filmmaker. And now you're working at, with Christopher or Jonathan Nolan. It's that to me is a true feat when you can. Art is truly art when it inspires others to make art. And this is something that, unfortunately, my timeline is rampantly full with people going, here's fan art that I created. One of the best things that I saw, holy crap, was the guy doing a duet on. I didn't realize, I thought this little, I typically hate this trackpad. Yeah, there it is, on brand. Because it's like, okay, it's a gimmicky thing. You got to do something with it. And I was strumming, and then I saw someone go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you had the articulation. I was like, that's the best use of this thing ever. And the guy doing the duet with Ellie doing Hallelujah, I was like, well, now it's just now you've got emergent gameplay happening. That to me is incredible.
By the way, that guy was one of our stunt people as well was our reader for Owen.
Is that Nashir? Who is that?
Yeah.
It was not.
Yeah.
Uh, I didn't know he could sing.
I didn't either until I saw that. I was like, that's rad.
That was holy dude. Nashir is a phenom. Is a great actor as well, as
Yeah.
many
No,
people are. He's just really good at getting thrown around. So let's get back into the.
wait, sorry, not this year. Now
Yeah.
I'm mixing them up. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. The name has escaped me. I feel horrible right now. But
Let's just keep him as Nashir, and Nashir will get take the credit. Nashir doesn't get enough credit for what he does. He can get the credit for this guy. We'll put it up in the comments or whatever it is. Trust me, the one thing that we have learned is if we say something incorrect, the internet will make sure that we have our day.
and they'll be polite,
They'll be polite.
respectful about it.
Yeah, no, like off-color comments at all. Um,
Tell
we
me
have,
what you've learned about Twitter the last few days.
dude. The best thing is that it is a creature of my design, and I had to have a reckoning with myself that it was so easy for me to be mad at everybody else when I realized that I was seeking it, that I was searching for it, and that I was intentionally. I was even talking to Travis Willingham about this, and he did the same thing. How we scroll past the good to find the bad, and because that bad is an instant, it's a sugar rush. It feeds it, but it's. I don't want to hear the praise. I want to see what people think of me. I want the critical thoughts. And the best thing that I realized was that I could delete it. I could stop looking at it. I could relegate it or regulate it. And what is most important to me about this game is not what other people thought about it. But the most important thing for me is that there is literally nothing that I would do differently. And I've never fought harder against and harder for the same game, character, and story as I have with this. I've never, ever in my life pushed against as hard as I did with you. Like, dude, we got after it with each other. And I remember even one point in the conversation, I was like, look, man, it was one of those, like, we were starting to talk over each other. And you pointed this out so beautifully. It was like, here's two people that love this man so much. And all we want is for him to be cared for. My favorite moment in the game.
It's fun. Like, if I could just comment on that for a second, it's we've had. I don't even. I wouldn't. I would never describe it as fight, but we've had creative disagreements.
Sure.
Sometimes on the set, sometimes on the phone, sometimes in front of other people, and sometimes people will come up to me like, "That Troy man, right? That's something," and I'd be like, "Dude, I would take that any day." over someone that's indifferent,
Yeah.
because he's wrestling with the material. He cares. That's why we're fighting. And often, like the people I care the most, that I respect the most, I have the biggest fights with.
Sure.
Because I respect their opinion. I'm like, I want to bring them on board, or like I want to understand where they're coming from, and it just we care, so it gets heated. That's what passion is. And I've worked with actors that are just like, so what do you want me to do? You want me to smile when I hit that fifth step? Okay, that's what I'll do. I'm like, no, I want you to feel it. I want you to like push back on what I'm telling you. Like give me something. And that's what I try to explain to people. I was like, dude, I love that. That thing that just happened, and you think I'm not upset. That's how we get to the good stuff.
By and large, people are they steer away. Oh, we don't want conflict. We don't want it's just play nice. And even I mean that comes from parents. Like I think about the way that my parents interacted between me and my sister. It was just I just here to keep the peace, just keep the peace. And I grew up thinking that contention and conflict was bad. And it's as I've grown older that I realize it's like, oh no, 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 no. That's how you and I become better friends, and it's how you and I become better people individually. But why did that come inherent to you as well? As far as just like, how do I create healthy conflict? And how did you have you always leaned into conflict, or have you? Is that the person back at Carnegie Mellon who's like he's kind of a dick to work with, or
No,
where come
I've
from?
always liked arguing. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the Israeli side of me, but
We do it really well.
well, I just like wrestling with ideas. I like trying to prove a point, or and at some point, right? I think when I've learned to let go more, it's like I like wrestling with ideas, and then like all of a sudden someone will say something, and then pause and be like, "Oh, that's interesting. That's
Hmm.
that's cool. I didn't like. I know I was just screaming a second ago, but like as you say that, like that makes me think about it. I mean, I just had it with Craig the other day about like the TV show, and we talked about something, and it just like kind of wrestled with something, and it wasn't even my idea that won out, but just going through that process got us to a better idea. Uh, I don't know where that came from, and there's always a fine line between being abusive and just wrestling with ideas in kind of a healthy way. And I've definitely have dealt with people where I felt like, dude, you're crossing the line. I'm not, if it's going to get personal, or it's going to like we're going to like raise our voice, or where we're shouting, then I'm going to stop. I'm going to put an end to it. And that's important as well, to like kind of set those boundaries. What are those healthy boundaries to do that with?
And that is something that's important to point out. Is like you and I've never yelled at each other. It's
No.
just, we both knew it. We were like,
It's
"Hey,
usually
man."
like kind of this passive aggressive smiles, like, yeah, I hear you, but like it can't, it's got to be
I
this thing.
there one of the things that I also pushed against, and hopefully we can get into this. If not, we can always cut it. But
Fuck it, let's get into. I don't know what
I
you're gonna say,
love it.
but we're not cutting it.
There was a scene, and you told me that we were going to shoot the scene. It may have been actually the last scene that we shot, and I'm purposefully being withholding as far as what the scene is for dramatic effect. But it was a scene that marketing had come and said, we are very, very optimistic about there's a thing called, and please, if I'm getting this wrong, you can jump in here at any time and save me. The conversion rate between people who pay or played Last of Us Part 1, and that means I will now buy Last of Us Part 2 and play The Last of Us Part 2. And they were super optimistic about their conversion rate. I was like, cool, I just learned something new about the game industry.
We're going now. It's fine.
So I'm like, that's a okay. Then fuck it, man. We just leave them in the lurch. It's like they need to play the first one, and we make it hard to find this. We don't make it wide and accepting. And then there's a scene that you hand me. And it's like, here's a scene that we're going to start with, where it's a scene between Tommy and Joel. And Joel is finally confessing to Tommy everything that happens. And I was like, wait, 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 wait. We're going to basically do a previously on as a scene. And I was so against it. I didn't like it because I felt like I was like, I'm serving a master, and it was this weird thing that bubbled up inside of me. I hated it. And the game opens up, And first of all, when we wrapped, you got me to such a great place. I was like, all right, this is a really really good scene. And I mean, we I think that was our entire morning was just that one scene. We spent like hours on it, and it was so much fun to work with. Like Jeffrey and I were just dancing inside that scene together, and we were just softballing things up to each other, and it was just it was a really I was like,
Also, like
no,
if I remember correctly, we're kind of like dropping lines and adding lines. We're like really playing with it. It felt
yeah.
very playful in the best kind of way that when we're on the set, kind of working on all cylinders.
Yeah, there was nobody from marketing going, okay, can you just somehow maybe put in here the on June 19th, 2021,
By the way, I have to pause you right there to
Please.
like, because I've seen someone like, fuck, I'm gonna get in trouble for this. I don't care. Someone recently said games are too long, and part of their thread, they were saying like it's because marketing wants to say how big games are, and that's how they're going to sell the game. In my 16-year career at Naughty Dog, marketing has never, not once, gave us a creative note to say this should be in the game, or the game should be this long, or this short, or have this feature. Not once in my entire 16-year career has that happened. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It just has never happened to us. The game is this long because we wanted to make it that long. And it
So
might be
that
too long for
see,
certain people, and it might be not long enough for certain people, but it's this long because that was our call.
so
Sorry,
that's
just had
no
to go
no
on
no
that
no.
tangent because you said like marketing. So it's like marketing never came to us. Be like, look, we need this previously on scene. That's just something we felt the story needed, and then it was like, how do we dramatize it? How do we like the story has this need now? How do we make it character driven?
Because the cheap punt would have been to do a previously on and do
Which
scene
we were working on. We had, while we were like thinking about how to do it in the game, we had an editor cutting together like a 5 to 10 minute version of like previously on. And the reason
that
I
was
didn't like that is
yeah.
it just, one, the visual fidelity. Like you're going to look at the stuff from like PS3 era graphics and then jump to like this other thing, and it's not going to feel unified. And
Previously
it's
on
like
The
like
Last
you
of
need
Us.
this thing outside of the story, outside of the game. It just didn't feel like the right solution.
So instead, what we get is this incredible, and I wish everybody we could you could see. There was a obviously that most of the props that we work with on the set are just a nightmare for sound. And so, whereas you would really want to get like grab the guitar, and I'm actually looking at the guitar that we used for a lot of the singing. A lot of the guitars that you find in the world were just beautiful. Some very expensive guitars. There was, I can't remember his name right now. Chris?
Chris, the played the guitar, the
Yeah. What's his last
Ashley's
name?
friend, the one that played like the Aha song, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's Chris. I forget his
Chris.
last name.
I walked into the studio one day and he was walking out because you guys were doing some sampling of different guitars because you find so many guitars in the world, which is really cool. And I was like, "Is that a 1940s Gibson?" He goes, "Yeah." I was like, "That's like a $10,000 guitar." He's like, "Yeah, this thing does not leave the studio." He's like, "This is a really, really like this thing hasn't seen sunlight in years." Um, but we we had to use it was a white painted guitar, and I think there's a picture that Ashley has up on her Instagram or something where she's Shannon's down at her feet, Dina's at her feet, at Ellie's feet, and there's that white painted guitar that's perfect for sound, and it doesn't in any way encumber the audio department. They get thumbs up. And I had, and you were the one that came up with this thing. It was like you're working on this guitar and you're just kind of cleaning the grime out from underneath the frets and stuff and creating busy work, which is such a great task, and a treat, and a great opportunity from an acting standpoint to just it was great. It was an amazing, like, awesome setup. But yeah, we went back and forth between. I remember one of my favorite lines in there was like, "But there was a cost." And then understanding that that wouldn't land. Like, what do you mean? And it needed to be. If this is a confession, it's a confession. You don't go to your priest and say, "I did some bad things." He's like, "What did you do?" I can't. If you're going to confess, confess. So that scene, as I'm playing it, I mean, it's just. I was like, I can't imagine this thing starting without it, and it just shows how much I didn't know And I didn't know that the reason why I think I fought against the scene with Joel, the death scene, especially when you're reading it on a script, because you don't have context, right? I didn't. All I had was black letters on a white page with some stage direction, and I didn't have anything else that contextualized and gave me the true vision for what that scene was going to be. And even in that, when I played that moment, that's not when I got it. When I got the powerful, the profundity and the power of that moment is after, when you go to the house.
Hmm.
And I remember texting you and I said, the house is the funeral and the wake. Because
Yeah.
even when you walk up, there's the flowers, and you go through the house and you get to see how this man lived. And the thing that got me was like, of course he would take a bath. He had a
It's funny.
shower.
I
He took
want
a,
to talk more about that scene and our conflict in that scene. Let me talk about my fears for a second before
please.
we talk about it. It's like there's a group of people that really hate that scene,
Yeah.
and I kind of get it because of what they feel for Joel, or they feel like Joel and Tommy were acting foolish and trusting these people. And right, there's things you could criticize about the scene. I disagree with them, obviously, but
Sure.
I get how they interpreted the scene, right? It's like, and how they interpreted the characters. Um, and I'm afraid, like, right, if as soon as I know what will happen, like, I'll say, oh, fuck it, let's just do it, right? You had issues with that scene, and you felt like in some ways it was too brutal. And I think the word when you called me on the phone is like, this feels pornographic.
Hmm.
Uh, and what I know is going to happen, right? People are going to hear me say that, like, even Troy knew that scene was bad, and I'm giving them ammo to like shit on that scene. But like, fuck it, they're already shitting on that scene, so who cares? Uh, Again, it was one of those moments where like I knew you're being disgusted at what's happening to Joel on the page, and Hallie is a better writer than I am, and by that I mean my writing is really dry. If you look at like scripts from Last of Us 1 versus Last of Us 2, Last of Us 1 is a harder script to read
Hmm.
because it's so dry. It's just functional. Hallie's writing is like, I could just read the script and that's art right there.
Sure.
And she took a pass at that scene and it describes what happened to Joel and it's upsetting. And it describes like he's being spit on. And I think one of your concerns that we talked through is like you were worried all of that is going to be on screen the whole time. And it's like, and I said, like, dude, trust me that we're it's not about how gory it is. And like, yes, there is disrespecting him, and he is dying in this kind of I don't know what the right word, disrespectful way. Like a lot of people say, like we disrespected the characters. Like to some degree, yes, but we also you could say we disrespected Sarah and we disrespected Tess and we disrespected Henry and Sam. But that's what just happens in this world. Like you don't go out in with respect, no matter like we talked about this earlier, no matter what you've done or haven't done. But what this story needed was for Ellie to see Joel in such a brutal way, so that's what she could draw on when she then has to torture a person to find out where Abby is. Because without that, we can't motivate the rest of the journey. Like without that, the story just isn't there.
Not only that, but it's also if you flip the tables. Like let's do a write a fictionalized story about the guy who's part of David's camp, and he's the hero, and we've been following that guy, and he was gonna be the great American novel, and along comes this dude in a green plaid shirt, and he puts a pen or a knife in his knee, and he says he'll pop his kneecap off, like flipping it around to Abby and especially her crew. This was years of retribution against a vile, despicable man that killed her father, robbed him, and that's the
Well, it's like
whole
again, if
point
we're
of
going
the
to talk
game.
about that, it's like let's talk about Joel, what Joel did to her. It's like he killed her dad, and she was close with her dad.
Right.
In killing her dad, he essentially ruined that cell of the Fireflies, everything they stood for. They were on the verge. They believed they were on the verge of curing
Cure.
this thing. So everyone that then they saw in those years, everyone that they saw get infected and die,
He's
they couldn't
responsible.
help but think about this man robbed us not only of this one person's life, but all these people's lives. And then maybe more than anything, he robbed Abby of her hope. Like she's just there with the WLF just functioning, killing scars. She doesn't believe in killing the scars or anything like right. She used to believe in hope, and Joel stole that from her.
In the same way
I
that
don't. But look, but I will say I don't believe she was in the right in torturing Joel. Personally, I don't think she was. I get why she did it. I don't think one should do that.
I think Abby would agree with you. And the thing that Laura clearly had a rough aftermath. Um,
By the way, how dumb is that?
it is, that's not the word. Um,
How vile. Like, I hate to call that stuff out, but it's like the threat against her 2-year-old.
yeah.
I'm going to kill your kid in front of you. And
The,
how fucked up is it for like people to just say, um, it's the internet. What do you want? You got hundreds of thousands of followers. Fucking deal with it.
yeah.
You should have known. Dude, didn't you see what happened with Star Wars? You should have known you're going to get this.
I was over at their house. We haven't seen Travis and Laura because of quarantine for months. And Laura called me, and I'm sure she wouldn't mind me sharing this. Laura called me, and whenever Laura calls me, that's a big deal. Like we'll text each other, but Laura and I used to go. We would have like Saturdays at Senior Fred's, or we would have like Tuesdays, and we would go get margaritas because we were that was our dynamic. If neither of us had a session or whatever, it's like we can go get happy hour real quick, and we would just hang out and just we were buds. And she was always really good about calling me out of my shit and encouraging me to be a better man. And I was always good at just being a cheerleader and letting her know that she was incredibly talented. So here's this moment where she's experiencing just seemingly this fire hydrant of vitriol from the internet. And what she wants to do is celebrate this game being released. And what she feels like she can't do is exactly that because it's just anytime someone goes, "You did a great job," it's like, "You're a worst person to ever exist." Um, and she's calling me and she's just like, "This is just really hard." And I just sat on the phone with her and just cried with her and encouraged her. I was like, get off Twitter. It doesn't have anything there for you. And she stood up a strong person and she got her ass kicked and she stood up and got back up and kept going. And I have the utmost respect for her. But I have the benefit and the audacity to speak on her behalf because what the joke is on them. And this is why I have not wanted to give it much credence because it's just laughable for me in my position. It sucks for her because she has to cry because it's all directed towards her. I can look at the ridiculousness from an objective viewpoint. It's so laughably stupid because that wasn't a plot twist that Laura was unfamiliar with. It wasn't like, oh, and by the way, it was, if I remember correctly, the first thing that you said to her about the character is like, I have a character and this is what's going to happen. You are going to be the person that kills Joel. And I'm over at her house the other day and I said, I have to confess to you that I didn't want you to play this role because I was very protective of you. And I saw this coming. I saw that you would get hate on an unprecedented level for doing what you do, which is giving us convincing characters and unbelievable and believable performances. And I said, what I realized after playing it was how, again, just like I was wrong about the Sarah scene, just like I was wrong about needing to go behind Video Village, just like I was wrong about the opening scene of the game, and just how wrong I was about thinking that Joel's death on the page was pornographic, is that there was anybody else capable of playing that role but Laura Bailey. Not just because of the actor that she is, but also because of who she is as a person and how much she loves this franchise, how much she loves games, and how much she loved that character specifically. There's nobody else that could have done it, not one person. And she did it willingly. She walked into that fight, eyes forward and head up, chest out. And that's why the joke is on them, is because she did it knowingly. And she showed up on set every day. And she loves that game. She played that game. So there ain't no sharp arrows that can hit Laura Bailey. So
Yeah, it's been a learning process for me because as much as
what have
people
you learned?
say you can anticipate it, and I've had it in small doses. Like when we did Left Behind, I got some vitriol like this. At some point where people realized I was Israeli, I got weirdly kind of anti-Semitic stuff. But it was in such small doses, it was very easy to dismiss. And I knew people would be upset. So like I did know on some level, yes, there were going to be people upset. There's going to be people that love I've said this all along, right? From the first time we've talked about this game, there's going to be people that love the first game that aren't going to like this game. I know that. And yet we still believe in this despite that. We are still going to do this despite that because our job is not to maximize profits or sales. Like people always feel like, oh, I got you if like somehow the game wouldn't have sold. And it's like the game is selling well and I don't care because it's never been about like the thing that's important to me, like just to talk about sales for a second is like, I just want to sell enough so we could do it again. So Sony will keep trusting us and give us the creative freedom to do whatever we need to do. And that's it. Anything beyond that is gravy, is like just bonus. So as far as reviews or sales, that's still outside of our control. What's most important when we come out on the other side, I've talked to you about this on the phone, is like when the leaks happened, and then right with the leaks, sorry, I'm going in a bunch of different tangents, but there was something that was happening even before the leaks. There started to be these rumors about the game and these kind of false narratives that the game has homophobic Christians and that's who you fight. And then there's like a series of like YouTubers and websites that just run with this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, like it was getting traction. I'm like, and people are starting to attack me again, not on the very like big level, but it's like there's these rumors going around like that Anita Sarkeesian worked on the game,
Right.
and that's getting traction, and that's based on like a talk I gave 7 years ago where I said I found some inspiration from her videos, and I was able to dismiss it, and then the leaks happened, and then all of a sudden it's like a fucking flood, and like those voices jumped on Joel dying and the fact that you played Joel's killer. And the fact that and then the fact that they said that like Joel's killer is transgender. And that was the recipe. That was like the right ingredients to just ignite a group of people. And I mean like loud enough where it's like that it felt like it was everywhere. It's not, right? Because even if it's like a few thousand people, it's nothing to the millions of people that will play this game, but it's like those people are not on social media, they're not checking forums, they're not doing all that stuff. So I was not prepared for that initially. And my first fear was that members of the team will look at that reaction and be disappointed in the game that they've made. That was my biggest fear more than anything. And I don't know if you remember, I called you and I'm like, dude, I'm afraid because of the fight we had about Joel's death, I'm afraid you're going to see this reaction and be like, I fucking told him. See, I told Neil, like, this was it. And to give you credit as a friend as well as a colleague, as like a collaborator, is like you told me how proud you are of the game, and that just put me at ease. Like just to say like then it doesn't matter. Then whatever noise these people make doesn't matter. And I wish there's so many people on the team that send me such thoughtful, beautiful notes. People that work their ass off. And I know that we work too hard and we have a certain reputation in the industry, and a lot of it is based on truth we're not proud of. And some of it is based on falsehoods, even in very reputable articles. Um, but so much of it comes from love. Some of it comes from like people work as hard as they do because what they believe in the project and what the project stands for. And I love pointing at this as an example of like the accessibility features this game has. Didn't come from me, didn't come from my boss, Evan, didn't come from our Kurt or Anthony, the game directors. It came from people on quote unquote the ground that wanted to make the game more inclusive, to allow more people to experience Naughty Dog stories. And they put in extra hours and time, even when I asked them not to. And I said, we got to finish this game, and people are working too hard. They ignored me and did it anyways. Even when I said, these are features, like, okay, we've added more features of accessibility past Uncharted 4, enough. And they said, no, this is now part of the game. And they fought me on it, and they were right. And seeing now people's reaction to how they played the game when they couldn't play this kind of game before, and how it moves them and how it inspires them. This is where conversations, again, around all this stuff, they're so black and white. And again, I'm just going to, we're so, you'll see, notice I don't talk about crunch, and I avoid all conversation about crunch because it's such a sensitive topic for me. And I care so much about the team and their well-being and how hard they work. I don't want to say anything until I feel like we've made enough progress in that area. But the conversation has just turned into like management is bad, end it, you're good, or continue it, you're bad. But it's more complicated than that. Like when we've taken certain steps to limit how hard people work, they were unhappy. Like employees were unhappy when we try to force them out of the office, and we started losing people. So then it's finding about the right balance of like, okay, how do we allow people to express their passion, what they find so much purpose in, while creating the right guardrails to protect them sometimes against themselves so they don't hurt themselves. And I've failed at that on this project. Tried certain things that didn't work, and we're going to try different things going forward, and we're bringing outside help to help us with that. That's a whole different conversation. I guess I just want to get into that. It's just some of the discourse has turned, it's so tribal. It's so like you're here or you're here, and the conversation is so much more nuanced than that on all these things, on like how we handle story and how we handle accessibility and how we handle work-life balance, on the kind of content that we make, on what's violent, what's the right representation, what's the right how should you handle diversity? Like I love the conversations around Lev and how some people have issues with it, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. It means you should just wrestle with those ideas and sometimes push back on them and see how people react to it. I'm rambling now,
No,
but there's just so much that I was not prepared for the reaction to the making of this game, to how this game has been received. And it's been a huge learning growth for me. And all I'll say is at the end of the day, to all our critics, we listen to that stuff and we digest a lot of it, but you're way less important. And some of you are not important at all when you're kind of shout and threaten and doing all that stuff. It's laughable. We send it to each other as jokes some of the time. Some of it is too serious, and some of it we send to authorities, and there's a whole team within Sony that handles security, and I don't want to get into that because it gets into legal issues. And that's not something to joke about, but a lot of it is to be laughed at. And at the end of the day, what matters most is how the team feels about it. When we got the amazing reviews, and they were better than what I thought they would be. I guess a lot of times they're better than what I thought it would be, because I always think like we'll do way worse than how we do. I started texting people one by one to say thanks and John Sweeney, who I had a lot of creative, we talk about creative tension, the art director. I had a lot of creative tension throughout the project with John Sweeney. He has very strong feelings about art and what it should look like. And sometimes we didn't see eye to eye. And sometimes I felt like I was right. We went one way. A lot of times we went his way, and we kind of find middle ground. And when the reviews hit, he was one of the first people I thought of to text personally. And I'm starting to write this text to him about like, dude, I know we didn't always see eye to eye. And like, as I'm writing it, I'm starting to cry. It was such a weird, and I couldn't even understand why I'm crying. Like I'm writing him this text, and I realized I can't text everybody on the team. There's just too many people on the team. And I just have to write the whole team an email. And I'm not very good at that stuff. So I started writing it. And I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but I'm writing like about my fears that like I'm getting too much praise and it's not being seen enough as a team project, but this is a Naughty Dog game in every sense of the word. And I forget how I ended it, but it was something to the effect of review scores are cool, but seeing your guys' pride is what I live for. And again, the reviews were awesome, and it's great to hear people love the game and how much it resonates with them, but nothing comes close to hearing you or Laura or John or any member of the team that has sent me an email since the game has come out to say, this is the best game I've ever worked on. Like, fuck the haters. Nothing makes me prouder that I've worked on in my life than this game. And that was like, okay, I want to just do the team proud. And if I've done that, then I've done my job.